Well, the waiting room seems to have died down a little bit, the activity of the waiting room. So maybe that's my signal that we should get started. I want to welcome everybody. My name is Greg Reish, and I'm the director of the Center for Popular Music here at Middle Tennessee State University in beautiful Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And the center, in case any of you are not familiar with it, I would encourage you to check us out on the web, check us out on your social media platform of choice. We certainly have adjusted our activities this past year because of the pandemic, but they have by no means stopped. We're still here. We're still working in various ways to fulfill our mission. We're having events like this one. We are open for researchers on an appointment-only basis, a limited basis. So if you're interested in coming down and doing some work, get in touch with me or one of the excellent members of my staff. We'll be happy to help you out. We do have a couple of other events coming up within the next month. On April 8th, we're going to have another Zoom panel event like this one on Zilphia Horton and the Highlander School, including panelist Kim Rule, who's got a book just now hitting the streets about Zilphia Horton, and also the co-directors of the Highlander Folk School are going to be with us. So that's going to be a memorable event. And on April 16th, we are having the third and final in our monthly series of unconferences on old-time music in the 21st century. So look for announcements and registration information and so on those events. Those are just a couple of things that we have coming up. I want to thank everyone for being here today, and I want to thank my panelists, especially our panelists, who you'll be introduced to formally in just a moment. Quick reminder that we are recording today. You all indicated your consent when you registered for the Zoom meeting, but I do want to give you the courtesy of reminding you that we are recording. And our plan is not only to keep this in the archive, but also to make it available to folks who couldn't be with us today, but might want to take it in at a later date, make it available by way of YouTube. There's going to be a Q&A session for about the last 20 or 30 minutes of our 90 minutes together. You are welcome to submit questions by way of the chat, and Kris and I will keep an eye on that, but you also have a chance to speak up if you prefer to pose a question that way. I want to introduce you now to our moderator today and thank her for agreeing to moderate today's discussion. My friend and colleague here at MTSU, Dr. Kris Mc Cusker, is professor of history, also co-executive director of the Oral History Association. Most of you probably know her work. She has several books that she has written and or edited on gender and country music and other topics. She teaches all kinds of courses in American music here at MTSU, and we are delighted to have her taking the reins today. So I will turn things over to Kris. Thank you very much.
Okay, remember to unmute myself. All right, folks. Thank you, Greg, for that nice introduction, and welcome everyone. We're glad to see everyone, and I hope you all are doing well and managing in a difficult time. When I began writing about country music and gender in the 1990s, there wasn't an historiography or a group of scholarly books about country music, let alone about the ways women operated in and were crucial to the genre's development and success. Then Bob and Mary's book, Finding a Voice, came out in 1993 saying, hey, there is a history of women in country music. And then Pamela Wilson's article, Mountains of Contradiction, in 1998 became the first foray into Dolly studies, as we'll call them today. And I want to make sure that everyone sees that Lydia's book on page 275 has a very useful list of all the works that have been done about Dolly. and that it's quite handy to have around. There is now a well-developed historiography of Dolly that has been enlivened and developed still further by our three authors today. And I would suggest that you need to read all three books in tandem with each other, because each adds a new portion of understanding who Dolly is and what Dolly does. I would also suggest that there's some other material out there. The Dolly Parton's America podcast out of WNYC, I believe it was, in New York City, was excellent. She did a recent interview with Brene Brown about leadership that's just excellent. And finally, in the last couple of weeks, Tressie McMillan Cotton's blog about the Dolly moment is one of the best pieces I've read in a long time about an artist. So I think I'd like to start today by introducing our authors. So let me begin and read their bio and let you know who each of them is. And then I will ask each of them to talk about their books, their motivations for writing them, what it is about Dolly that is so intriguing, is intriguing enough to put so much time into talking about this remarkable musician and human being. And those of you who are dialing in from outside of the state of Tennessee, Dolly walks on water in this state, so much so that they have been trying to get rid of the Nathan Bedford Forrest statue at the state capitol for years now. And they finally found some movement when they suggested that they put a statue of Dolly there instead. She said, "Thank you, but no thank you," in her kind and most generous way. So let me tell you who's speaking today and their excellent books. Leigh Edwards is a professor of English at Florida State University. She is the author of this book, Dolly Parton, Gender and Country Music, which was published by Indiana University Press in 2018 and was the winner of the Forward Book of the Year award. She's also the author of the books Johnny Cash and the Paradox of American Identity, also Indiana, and The Triumph of Reality TV, The Revolution in American Television. A scholar of US literature and popular culture, she focuses on the intersections of gender and race in popular music, particularly country music, and in television and new media. She has published on country music in places like the Journal of Popular Music Studies, Southern Cultures, and the Journal of Popular Culture. She is on the advisory board of the Institute for Bob Dylan Studies and on the editorial boards of the Journal of Popular Television and the Popular Culture Studies Journal. We are also joined today by Lydia Hamessley, who is a professor of music at Hamilton College in Clinton, New York, where she teaches courses. And this is how broad, wide-ranging her interests are: music and Renaissance music and medieval music, music and film and world music as well. She received her PhD in musicology from University of Minnesota in 1991 and has won 2 teaching awards at Hamilton. She writes on old time and bluegrass music with an emphasis on women in Southern Appalachia. She has also written about the banjo in the 19th century, a terrific article on Appalachian murder ballads, and Peggy Seeger. She appeared in the BBC 2 documentary, Dolly Parton, Here I Am, which is currently available on Netflix. She is also a clawhammer banjo player, sort of channeling the ghost of Lily Mae Ledford there, and she has been to Dollywood. Now, Bob Oermann is our third speaker today, and he co-wrote with Dolly Parton's Songteller, My Life and Lyrics. And Bob, I would hold this up, but it's a big book and it would hurt my hand. He has been dubbed, rightfully so, the Dean of Nashville's Music Writers and has become one of Nashville's leading multimedia figures, a journalist, TV personality, radio broadcaster, graphic artist, lecturer, photographer, archivist, and author, an all-around Renaissance guy. Oermann is the weekly columnist for the trade publication Music Row and has been published in more than 100 periodicals. He has authored 9 books and written liner notes for more than 100 albums and box sets. In addition, he has produced more than a dozen historical reissue recordings. Among his best known books are Behind the Grand Ole Opry Curtain, Little Miss Dynamite, The Life and Times of Brenda Lee, A Century of Country, and the award-winning Finding Her Voice, which we've already mentioned. And the book he'll talk about today was on the New York Times bestseller list in 2020. And in 2013, he scripted, co-directed, and edited the mini-series Dolly Parton, Song by Song, for the Ovation Arts cable channel. He's also a featured commentator on the annual ABC TV specials that preview the CMA Awards. Welcome to all 3 of our speakers. And I think where we need to start is with each of your works. Introduce us to Dolly as you see her, and to each of your tomes. Leigh, why don't we go ahead and start with you? Dolly Parton, Gender and Country Music.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Kris. And thank you to Greg for the invitation to speak. And I'm thrilled to be here with Lydia and Bob. I really admire their work a great deal. So I decided to do research on Dolly Parton as a case study. First of all, because I think she's a brilliant songwriter, and obviously I'm a fan, but also because I think she engages with key issues around gender, race, class, and region, and that her work really sheds a lot of light on those issues in the history of country music and really in American culture more broadly. In my book on her, I called for Dolly studies as a field and for more work to be done because I think it is such a key case study. And I do think, there's been a lot of recent press interest in her because of this idea of the 19 force idea that she plays to both sides of the aisle, as it were, that people from different groups, a spectrum of points of view. And that's a long tradition in country music. And so there's something that's very interesting about that to try to think through what that means. She sort of works across contradictions. And I do think that there's a lot more great scholarly work to be done on Dolly and hope that it continues to increase. In my book, I'm looking at her gender performance specifically in everything from her songwriting to her autobiography, to Dollywood, to her film and TV roles, including the fan culture around her and fan documentaries, and how she uses new media trends like her online presence and her transmedia storytelling, like with the Netflix films where she's turning her songs into Netflix anthology series. In terms of what she's doing with gender, I think it's an important topic. Obviously in her career, she was a trailblazer in terms of female singers getting greater access and still lobbying for that. Issues like owning her own publishing and starting her own record labels. These issues continue to be extremely important, and obviously there's a big push for equity and inclusion right now in country music around issues of gender, race, and sexuality, artists who are women, people of color, LGBTQ+. And so there's a lot of important work that's being done on that, and I think she's an important case study in that context as well. In my book, I'm arguing that what she's doing with gender is she's doing a camp critique of gender role stereotypes. And there's specifically stereotypes about the so-called hillbilly. So tropes of Southern white working class femininity, specifically Appalachian, and how those ideas have been used in country music performance history and really American pop culture more broadly. And I'm looking particularly in her song lyrics and her stage persona and media image, and how she's engaging with the ideas of gender and what story is she telling. I should say that what I'm talking about is not necessarily that she's intending to have all these multiple significations. She's clearly in control of her own image and her own career and her own content. But I also think she's engaging with some powerful tropes, and her work generates a lot of multi-layered significations. So what I'm talking about are dynamics that are maybe implicit in her work. So for example, she says she doesn't identify as a feminist, but it's okay with her if other people frame her that way. In terms of what she's doing with that media image, the exaggerated gender performance, that's really a focus of my book. And she says she used that signature exaggerated look really as a gimmick to get people to listen to her songs. She talks a lot in her rhetoric and her sort of autobiographical narratives about fake versus real, sort of fake appearance versus real sincerity. So that familiar sincerity contract in country music. And the line from her song Backwoods Barbie is, "I might look artificial, but where it counts, I'm real." My specific argument is that she's making a gender critique by bringing together two specific tropes from country music performance history. The first is the innocent mountain girl, and the second is what she calls her hillbilly tramp image. She says she based part of her image on a woman from her hometown who was a prostitute because she thought the woman's look was beautiful. And she played an iteration of that woman in her NBC movie, Christmas in Many Colors. So it's unusual, her sort of explicit statement that she's basing part of her look on a woman who was a prostitute. So I'm saying she's taking this innocent mountain girl and the hillbilly tramp. She's saying through exaggeration, through juxtaposing those, this sort of camp, ironic version of them, she kind of explodes them as stereotypes. They're both stereotypes about Southern white working class femininity. And by juxtaposing them, this sort of pure versus the fallen woman, she's showing how they're both really limiting stereotypes. And by critiquing them, she's making more space for gender expression. In addition to that, one other thing I think she's doing is creating a new kind of authenticity narrative. So she's using her life story a lot in her content. In country music, we have the long-running sort of purity versus the market rhetoric of country authenticity, sort of the folk roots of so-called real country versus sellout manufactured country pop, for example. It's sort of gender distinction, long-running one that people are familiar with. What I'm saying is that she's working both sides of that binary, sort of real fake, folk-based writing, country pop writing, and she's just showing those to be arbitrary distinctions and kind of bridging that tension in her work. She's both things at once, and she's kind of challenging who gets to count as real and true country music, what gets to count. Finally, one last point I would just make is that that's a broader folk culture versus mass culture tension in American culture. And I talk about that a lot in the book. So it's sort of a larger philosophical issue. For the future, I think she has been doing so much transmedia storytelling recently that there's lots of room for more work. So when she's taking her content and taking it across different mediums like the Netflix material. And then finally, I just want to say it's an important time for studying country music. There's folks like Jada Watson and Paula Bishop working on gender and country music in important ways. Just a shout out to their work. Also Nadine Hubbs, Francesca Royster, Kim Mack, and Amanda Martinez. And Tracy McMillan Cottom's work about race. Just sort of an important time to be working on these larger issues. And Dolly Parton is a key case study for that.
Great, thank you, Leigh. And folks, if please see the chat so that you can see the links to each of these books and go out and buy all of them. All right, Bob, why don't we go next to you? Tell us about what you were doing with Dolly. And I have to tell you, Bob, that as I was thinking about this, I was hoping that you'd call Dolly up and say, hey, come and join us just for the day.
Yeah, like she has nothing else to do.
Yeah, I know, dream on.
You mentioned it's my 9th book. It was also my most difficult book. Dolly got the book contract through a book packager in New York with Chronicle, and Chronicle is the company that had done that beautiful Beatles book of the Beatles lyrics. So I knew it was going to be visually a spectacular book. She hired me to do the book. Basically, I was basically the project manager, which meant not only the content as far as the words, but also the images and also all the song clearances and all the photo clearances and all of that stuff. The Chronicle people knew nothing about Dolly, nor did they know anything about country music. They're in San Francisco. So I took them to Dollywood and I took them backstage at the Grand Ole Opry and had them meet her. And they were thrilled, of course. She charms everyone. And she and I worked through December, January, February of last year. And then the pandemic hit. And we did the rest of it by, she loves to fax. Dolly loves to fax things. So we faxed back and forth a lot and did phone stuff, clearing up all the little odds and ends and details. Meanwhile, I was still finding archives of photos of her that had not been seen before, going into her archives, both at the publishing company and the management company, and trying to coordinate with the graphics department what the book was going to look like. And as you know, it's a spectacular looking book, which I was very pleased with. On top of all this, we were met with a ferociously horrible deadline. They wanted the book out by the fall, which meant everything had to be turned in by June. And Dolly and I didn't quit working on her interview stuff until end of February. So that gave us just a very small short window. I was terrified that there was going to be some glaring error would creep into print because the deadline was so tight. Dolly, it turns out, is a fantastic proofreader. She catches every little detail, every period, every misspelling. She's great at it, and which is great because I'm terrible at it. So between the two of us, I think we did manage to pull off a book without, I've not found a glaring error yet. The book is arranged by songs, semi-chronologically. She left that up to me too. I had to do all the song outlines and all of that stuff, and then she would approve, and then she would add and subtract. But she approved the basic outline to start with, which was going from my Tennessee mountain home all the way through to her inspirational, iconic stature of today, with side chapters on the movies and gospel and other people singing her songs. So she is a great delegator. She knows me, she's known me for 40 years. So she just basically said, here, make me a book. And so I did. And she, as I said, but with her approval on every little detail all the way through, she was fantastic to work with, as she always is. I mean, and that's basically why I agreed to do it. It was a huge undertaking to be the project manager for so many, there were a lot of moving parts to take care of. So it was really, really hard. But it's Dolly. And I would do anything. I mean, I love hanging with her. I love working with her. And how could I say no? So that's how the book came to be. It came out in November. It's been out for 3 months now, I think, 3.5. Just in time for Christmas. Did extremely well. As you mentioned, it made the New York Times bestseller list. That's my first book to ever do that. But I didn't do it. Dolly did it. But it's very much Dolly's book. I mean, it was her input all the way through that kept the project going. She's a pro. She's a complete pro. And I think that she picked me because although I'm a fan, I'm not a gaga. As we call in Nashville, a germ. I'm not a germ. She thinks of me, as many in the industry do, as this kind of brainy guy who likes country music and what the heck is that? Why are you here? Kind of. I've gotten that pretty much throughout my career. I remember Roseanne Cash said to me one time, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm waiting for you." So I think that she perceives me as somebody who is a get it done person and a pro. And she thinks of herself as uneducated or less educated than I, which I think she's as smart as anybody I know. And so that the dealing with Dolly is the easy part. The rest of the production was the hard part. All of the clearances and all the finding the photos and going through the archives. And the people at Dollywood, the people at the publishing company, the people at the management company, we all pulled together. It literally took a village to pull this thing off in a very, very tight turnaround time. The book's weight has been remarked upon many times, and that is because the graphic designer wanted a really, really heavy stock paper. It is a very heavy book. It's a doorstop. But at the end of the day, I'm extremely proud of it. And as I say, I just love working with her and always have. I don't know quite, I don't know quite what else to say except that
That's
it's,
good. No, that's fine. It's a beautiful book. There's this gorgeous photo of Dolly in there, and she's dressed as a butterfly, and the color, and it's just vibrant. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. Thanks, Bob.
and it is about the lyrics. I mean, I want people to understand first and foremost that this is a brilliant, brilliant songwriter,
Mhm.
and that her lyrics, unlike most song lyrics, her lyrics scan very well on the page. They read extremely well on the page, which was a pleasant surprise to me when I first started to look at them. Because I'm not a big, I don't like lyric books by and large. I think lyrics look stupid on the page usually. But when I started reading even my favorite ones that I knew every word of, I went, this scans really well on the page. I was really impressed with that, with how well her lyrics read. And so, that is the book right there. That, you know, that it is Dolly, songwriter in excelsis Deo.
Cool. Thank you, Bob. And finally, Lydia, why don't you tell us about Unlikely Angel, the songs of Dolly Parton?
Yeah, well, thank you. And thanks for having me on this panel. It's an honor to be here with Bob and Leigh. And so thank you both for making this happen. So Unlikely Angel is a book about Dolly's music. The subtitle is The Songs of Dolly Parton. So, you know, I'm a musicologist. I come in through and most interested in the music itself. And of course, that includes the lyrics. But so many books about Dolly are biographies and often don't really engage too much with the music, even though Dolly says herself that she identifies first and foremost as a songwriter. That's the most important identity she has. It's what she wants to be remembered for. And so the songs are the focus of the book. So I do a deep analysis of a lot of the songs, but then what I like to do is connect the songs to her life and her experiences. But I hope I do that in a way that everyone can understand. I know sometimes people think, oh, if it's a book by an academic music professor, I won't be able to read it. And I've intentionally written it in a way that I hope everyone can read it. And if you get into one or two sentences, you'll just like float over the top of them and come back down and kind of trust me through it. And readers who really want to delve deeply, I think, into Dolly's music are going to find that's what they're going to find in this book is a real deep analysis of her songs. When I was working with the songs, I began to see connections between and among various songs. And so I decided to organize the book by topic. I was curious to see whether Bob and I chose the same topics, and there's some overlap in the way we organized, but then some differences as well. I have a chapter on her love songs, then her songs about women, her tragic songs, and her uplifting songs. I did that because I began to see that there were so many connections between her songs, sometimes melodic similarities. Sometimes she returns to the same lyrical ideas or tropes. And I thought if I present this material chronologically, those connections will get lost because the song from 1968 will no longer be sitting right next to the one from 1999 when they're actually reworking the same kinds of ideas. But I also knew I needed to give readers a kind of overview of her career. So I do start with that. It's not a biography, and this book is not a biography, but I do go through her musical life. And then I also devote a chapter to her songwriting process itself. And then a couple of chapters on her Appalachian heritage and how that affects her songwriting, as well as her vocal style. And what I ended up with, I think, is that I found that elements of her life and her experiences are reflected in her songs, but not often in the way that a lot of people think they are. And I draw on her biography in my analyses of the songs. And what I guess I would say is that the book is not the story of Dolly's life. It's a book about Dolly's songs, but that it reveals a different way of understanding her life through her songs. And that you get to know something about her through her songs that you might not get through many other ways of taking her on. I think she has a real core set of values that are consistent and inform her songwriting. And that was my premise, was that the principal way she expresses her core beliefs and values are through her songs, so that we then learn what she values in relationships, what she thinks about systems of injustice, her spiritual life. Another thing I should say is that there is a thread that runs through the whole book, which is that much of Dolly's music does reveal a really deep connection to her Appalachian heritage. So even if it's not a chapter on the Appalachian heritage, it's still there through the whole book. Dolly says she sings that old mountain music better than any other style of music she sings. She says it's her first and true love. And of course, not all her songs are revealing of her Appalachian heritage, but I think a lot of them do, and sometimes in ways that don't seem very obvious. So I guess I'll close by saying that I was really fortunate to be able to interview Dolly in an interesting kind of round robin remote sort of way, but I submitted a list of questions to her and she responded brilliantly and so generously to that, recorded all of her answers to my 4 pages of questions on cassette tape, and then had her assistant put it on a CD and send it to me. Many people say I should use the opening of that as my ringtone, because she starts by saying, "Hello, Lydia, this is Dolly Parton." So that was pretty amazing. But my goal in the interview was to ask her questions about her music and songwriting that no one had asked her before. I often found in reading interviews, people would get right up to the point where I was sitting on the edge of my chair, and then they didn't go the next step and ask her to go into more detail. So I went there, and I think she really liked having the opportunity to talk about her music in such detail. And after that interview, I was even more persuaded that her, as she calls it, her Smoky Mountain DNA has shaped so much of her music, and just made me even more certain that Dolly is, above all of her other identities, which are myriad, she really is a profoundly gifted and sensitive songwriter. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Perfect. Thank you, Lydia.
Mhm.
You know, and this, so before yesterday, I sent some questions to our 3 panelists, and, you know, I may do some collapsing here just for time's sake, but one of the questions I sent to them, I asked them, who's Dolly Parton? Because when someone is an icon, there are different layers, because the audience comes to the performances with different expectations, different backgrounds, different desires for the person on stage to become. And so I think I'm going to collapse 2 of the questions that I sent to our panelists earlier. And what I asked originally is, who is Dolly Parton? And in some ways, you folks have answered that. In some ways, you've complicated it, because Lydia and Bob talked to Dolly Parton, and she said, "This is who I am." But you've also all noted that she has this subversiveness, this boundary crossingness. And so I'm wondering that if we kind of collapse those 2 questions, who is this real human being versus the mass media image? And however you folks want to define, you know, sort of define that question for yourselves. But let me ask that question first. And Lydia, if you don't mind, since you're already on my screen, why don't you start us down this path?
Oh, wow. So who is Dolly Parton? Well, of course, I come at her as a musicologist and think of her as primarily the songwriter, but I think that she reveals such depth of care for people. We see her as a philanthropist. We see her, you mentioned, as a motivational speaker, because I had written about that in the book. So often people think of her almost as a saint or as a healer. And I guess I would want to put out there that she is subversive and multifaceted, and yet in some ways absolutely consistent. she is consistent, I think, in her optimism, in her generosity, in her open embrace of so many people. And I just haven't seen any fissures where that's an act, where that isn't absolutely who she is. And I think that through the songs, she's working out a lot about her her care for people. She can write the most sad songs. We can think about all of the, as she calls them, her sad ass songs, the ones where children are abused and babies are dead and all of these things. But she's doing that, I think, out of a place of care, because she has witnessed either firsthand or on the news or in the world, she's witnessed such injustices that she wants to bring those forward. And I think her power in doing that is that she doesn't make things seem overtly political. She's an ultimate storyteller. She tells an individual story in a song through one person or one person's experience, and makes it possible, I think, for listeners to empathize with those situations. And that's probably why people feel that she's such a healer, because I think she allows her listeners to tap into some of that generosity of spirit and open quality that she has. So that's one thing to get us started.
Great. Leigh, how would you answer that question?
Well, I'd say too that I appreciate the things that Lydia was talking about, especially the sort of the ethic of care kind of driving force in a lot of what she's doing. I'd say too, she's someone that deals really well with contradictions and really complex ideas, and that she can inhabit them and kind of explore them in her work. I do think that her songwriting has a lot of complexity in terms of the themes that she's addressing. And even just the kind of work that she does, it is so multifarious, sort of across film, TV, her theme parks, the music itself, and her writing. It's sort of astonishing. And I mentioned before that, transmedia storytelling is kind of all the rage right now in the media industry, but she's been doing it for decades. So she did her autobiography and an album at the same time, and just sort of understanding how to take the themes she wants to talk about and a lot of content about her life story and tell it across multiple platforms in a complex way is really engaging to people, and I think really unusual. I also think that she can convey the sense of emotional realism, sort of a cultural theory term that we talk about a lot, but emotional realism, affect, the sense of sincerity that you get, and that she's able to do that in her storytelling while being totally conscious of how there's a knowingness about how media images are constructed. She's not sort of at all trying to kind of pull a fast one on anyone. She's playing around with these ideas. So she can do both things at once. She can be really playful about media images, but also sort of a bedrock sincerity about the themes that she wants to talk about. And I think that's a really unusual combination.
Great. And Bob, this real human being versus a mass media image, you're doing both, aren't you? Dolly, have known her for 40 years, you said, and yet you're helping her construct that media image in some ways too. How would you respond to these conversations?
I say a very loud amen to what Lydia said in terms of she's a really nice lady. I mean, but bottom line is she's a really nice lady. I live in a world where, I deal with celebrities all the time. I've interviewed everybody from Bob Seger to Tina Turner to Johnny Cash to Roy Orbison, Burt Reynolds, name it. I've been to every concert with a backstage pass but God. And I see in show business a lot, and I see people in show business a lot. And she stands out. Her humanity stands out in a very real way. While we were working on the book, we started talking about Larry, the little brother who died, and she cried. She began to cry, and I thought, "Oh my God, I've made Dolly Parton cry." I felt horrible. I just was, and that said it all to me. And that happened when she was 9 years old, and that feeling is still right under the surface, and that she can still keep her feelings so close to the surface, which is what great songwriters have to do. In order to be a great songwriter, that's essential, and especially a great songwriter over 6 decades. She kids around. We took a break one time, to just go back in the break room and chit chat a little bit between sessions. And I should have mentioned earlier that this was also an audiobook. So I was faced with the challenge also of having, and her management company wanted it on video too. So we were surrounded by cameras and audio equipment and cables and shit everywhere while we were trying to do this thing for day after day after day. She could outwork me like nobody's business. After 6 or 7 hours, I would be exhausted. And I said, we have to break. No, let's keep going. Let's keep going. She would just go. And I'm going like, no, really, I'm exhausted. I have to, let's pick this up tomorrow. So she's a workhorse. She's a tremendous workhorse. And I admire her so much for that as well. But, the whole production was, I don't think of it as creating her image. At one point she said to me, I'm sick of talking about her, meaning Dolly, meaning, aren't you sick of her? And frankly, by that point I was, but I didn't say that. But she knows, imagine a life where every week of your life, you're asked the same stupid questions over and over and over and over again by journalists and TV people and British people and German people and, all over the world. So you grew up in a log cabin, what? Tell me about that. It's stuff like that, where you get the, when you're an entertainer, a celebrity, you don't know what's coming at you from the next interview person. It could be a really bright person who knows all about you, or it could be some ignoramus who just knows your name and nothing else about you. So you get used to telling your story over and over and over again. It's very, very difficult to be in the public eye like that. And she pulls it off. She makes every interview fresh somehow. I don't know how the hell she does it. To live in that world would make me nuts. To have to be famous. Being famous is hard. And to be famous and kind is super hard. And she's both of those things. She's an international icon who has, one of the reasons she is what she is the enormous humanity that she exudes. And it's real. She cares about people. She cares about that imagination library. She cares about kids learning to read. She cares about her people in poverty back in the mountains. I mean, she's got a good core. She's got a good soul.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what else. Is that good enough?
No, that's awesome. But what you're saying is that she understands there's two people there. There's the person that she is quintessentially, and she lets that out. But at the same time, she has to deal with a whole group of people who, like you said, come up and say, so you grew up in a log cabin. So let's talk about
people that are academics who know a whole lot about her, who've made their life studying of her, and she has to deal with both. It's both things. It's
Sure.
It's like being Cher or Bette Midler or anybody like that. They're giant icons,
Mm-hmm.
Or Tina Turner. Any of those people, they all live in that world.
Yeah.
It's a hard world to live in.
Well, Bob, I'm going to stay with you for a second because I want to ask a question about country music studies in general, because you were one of the first, you, Bill Malone, and Charles Wolfe in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and Finding Her Voice came out. You and Mary wrote that and brought it out in 1993. That there's a tendency to write about country music as rooted in an individual singer's biography. And that, and in some ways, it feels like country music does that, is unique in that regard. I did it. I was thinking about Patrick Huber's book. Lynn Ted Stomp does it. Bill Malone's Country Music USA. Here's the performer and the performer's story, and then here's the broader picture of country music. And I don't know that
I would take it another step beyond that. Here's the broader picture of country music, and here's the even broader picture of where society is when that was being created. Mary is by training a sociologist and an anthropologist. I'm a historian and a journalist. Well, journalism is the rough draft of history, as they say, or the first draft of history. I have always come at it by, I find that country music reflects the time and place in American society where it's created. I think it vividly does that. It so vividly does that because it's so lyric based. And if you look back at it, if you look at the songs of the 20s and the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, all of them brilliantly reflect where we were as a culture at the time, in my opinion.
Lydia, how would you answer that as someone who's written a long time as well about country music, or at least portions of it? Why do we look at biography as the intro to the rest of the world?
Well, I have a couple of thoughts about that. One, I think that when you're moved by an artist, whether it's a musician or an actor or anyone who moves you artistically, I think we just simply want to know more about them. We want to get into that space because we've been moved in some way by them, and we kind of want to unpack what's that about? How do I get more of that, right? So I think that's part of what's going on. And I think, again, going back to what I said about music, is that I think a lot of people are very moved by music and then have the mistaken belief that they don't understand anything about music. I teach a lot of non-music majors, and so I hear this, from the first day. They're saying, well, I love music, but I don't know how to talk about it, or I don't understand it. And I think a lot of people feel like that. And so they feel they don't have anything really to say about the music, but the lyrics and the biography are things that they can kind of connect with. They're both stories. We either get the story of the person's life or we get the stories that person has told, and stories are compelling. And so I think partly, particularly in the academic world of writing about country music, where so much of the writing, especially early on, was not done by people who were musicologists, but done by people in other fields. It was because we were telling those stories at the same time that people who might have wanted to write about country music as a musicologist would have been told that they can't do that because there's nothing there. There's no there. It's 3 chords. What can you say, right? There's this assumption that there's nothing really musically interesting going on. And so some writers will tend to default then to looking at lyrics and not necessarily considering the musical ideas. But I completely agree with what Bob's saying about the story, the life story, and the lyrics, all of that also reflecting the larger culture. And all of that is an excellent way, I think, to engage people and maybe to pull people into either the study of history or the study of country music, depending on which direction they're coming from, because the stories of these people are so compelling. I guess one last thing I'd want to throw out there is that and you asked us a question, I think, that went down that road. We then really idealize and fantasize what those stories are. That those stories are not necessarily truth. They may have authenticity attached to them, but they may not be true, but they are the stories we want to hear and tell about ourselves.
That's wonderful. Yeah. Leigh, let me turn to you next as someone who has written 2 books about 2 country music icons and have framed both those works around one artist more than so Dolly Parton and Johnny Cash. How would you answer this question?
So I think, coming out of an English department and sort of literary studies and media studies, we're definitely looking at texts as what do they reflect about culture more broadly. So I definitely agree with Bob and Lydia about the sort of larger cultural resonances. And I think in particular, popular music is a space where any genre has different ideas about what authenticity is. It's obviously a subjective idea that's socially constructed. It reflects something about the values or beliefs at the time, the way people think about that genre.
Keep going
Um,
away.
Sorry, somebody's
Oh,
unmuted.
yeah.
Sorry. So I think it sort of reflects a lot about, so the text reflects a lot about the context. That's how we tend to kind of analyze it when we're doing literary studies. And I think that's the case with any genre. I'm doing a lot of research on Prince right now, and certainly, it's using Prince as a case study to think about some of these larger cultural issues. And in part, it's because you're looking at the way an individual artist is engaging with these issues of authenticity in the genre. I do think in country music, it is more pronounced, and I'd agree with the point that Bob is making, and also Lydia's making, that it's really storytelling through lyrics in a really profound way, and that sort of is pretty distinctive. For Dolly Parton specifically, I'd say it's because she's using her life story so much in her content. It is a central part of the content of what she's doing. When she's telling stories, like with the Netflix material and any material that she's doing almost, she's making references to autobiography in some way. Even if it's not meant to be a story from her life, she's making references to contexts that she's claiming a connection to with her autobiography. And I think that is something that is that you can see a lot in some popular music, and it's because of the authenticity rhetoric in different genres. And I think it's just maybe particularly powerful in country music.
That's great. Thank you all very much. I want to ask one last question. I wish I had time for two last questions. With Dolly, there's a lot of discussion about race coming up recently, in part because the Appalachian Mountains were sort of constructed as the last pure bastion of whiteness. And a lot of scholars some scholars are starting to really critique that and think about that. Unfortunately, I don't think we have time for it. I will say, though, that the fact that Dolly coming out and saying, do we think our little white asses are the only ones that matter, have pointed an arrow at her, and she's willing to take that, and that's great. So let me ask one final question, and Leigh, I'll start with you because you're still on my screen here. For a woman with 60-year career who's done as much work as she's done, and especially as you point out in your book, that she reinvents for different platforms as well. What do you think is what for scholars who write about Dolly, what should we be writing next about her? What is something that needs to be, what stories need to be told about her?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think for sure, these discussions about race that are really current, that people are talking about right now, are very important. I also think with Dolly, I'm really interested in the transmedia storytelling piece, like how she adapts to different media environments. You could almost do a study of her career for what it reflects about what each medium is doing in that decade, because she's, pioneering in terms of television, as Bob and Mary noted in their book very early on. So I think that's really interesting, how she's using transmedia storytelling. Also, I just think that in scholarship, we call it affect studies, but again, this idea of emotional realism, conveying feeling, is something that she does really powerfully, and I think is worth some further discussion. So even if she runs into somebody that's criticizing what she's doing, usually they're still going to say they still love her, though. And so I think that there's something about the emotional realism of her content that's really important, and that's important to study. And I just wanted to give a quick shout out that Kirsty Faircloth and I are talking about maybe trying to do a Dolly Studies conference and edited collection. So I think there's just a lot of room for more scholarship in the area.
Thanks, Leigh. Lydia, what would you say to that question? What do we need to know about Dolly now or next?
Well, I do agree with the direction Leigh went with two things. The issue around race, I think there's so much more that can be done there. And I think also I like that idea of the emotional realism and the affect studies. That's just what is so, that seems to be the kernel of the questions that that people have asked me, for the past few months since the book has been out. Like, why does everyone love Dolly? What's her power? What's her secret? So I think there's a lot there. Of course, for me as a musicologist, I only got to talk about 175 of her 3,000 songs. So there are a lot more songs to be talked about. And I remember having a moment when I was writing, I was listening to one of her songs that turned out to be the title song for my book, Unlikely Angel. And I had this moment where I sort of wanted to tell the world, wait, stop. Because as I was listening to it, it sounded really familiar to me, the way something will, and you just want to, everybody stop so you can figure out, why is this reminding you of something? And I realized it was the very same melody. That was in 2014, the Unlikely Angel. It was the very same melody from a song that had come out in the late 80s called More Than I Can Say. Very different songs, completely different songs, and yet identical melody and harmony. And in that moment, I was like, oh my God, listen to the way she has taken this and transformed it so much. And I was so thrilled. I had made this great discovery, and I called a friend and I said, I feel really great about this, and it also scares me, because what else have I missed? Because I've been listening to those songs for several years before I figured that out. And I thought, what else have I missed? I can't publish this book yet. It's not ready. I've missed everything. And she said, leave something for someone else to discover. You can't find it all. So that made me feel a bit better. So I guess in some senses, there's way more to discover in her music for me.
Terrific. Yeah, she faxed you that, right? Bob, how would you end this conversation?
I have to echo what Lydia just said, because the same thing happened to me last year. For the first time, I realized that Delta Dawn and Amazing Grace are the same melody. It was like, I can't believe I've been listening to these songs for all my life and I never realized it before, and they're identical. Anyway, setting that aside, why I think we should keep on studying Dolly is the fact that Dolly is nowhere near done. I mean, just since the book was published, she's gotten a greeting card line, a comic book is coming out, a perfume is coming out, a music hair special is coming out on Netflix. Her relationship with Netflix keeps going. She's had a #1 gospel hit with Zach Williams that just won a Grammy Award. She had a #1 dance hit for the gay community with Galantis, that Swedish pop act. She just keeps on going. There's no, you can't freeze her in amber or in any other medium. Dolly, one of the hardest things about doing a book with her is that looking back is not her natural mode. Looking forward is her natural mode. Her natural mode is the next idea, they call her title at Dollywood Dreamer in Chief. And there's a reason for that. She's always coming up with new stuff. The woman gets up at like 5 a.m. or something, or 4:30. She gets more done by 10 than I get done in a week. She's always coming up with stuff. The hardest part about working for her is keeping up with her. And that's why you must keep studying her, because there's a new page being turned every day in that life and in that career. It's the one constant, as Lydia said, I think she's a constant too. And when somebody talked about the Black Lives Matter interview, I said, Dolly is always on the side of angels. And I believe that. And I think the reason the biography feels for Dolly scholars feels like, oh, that again, is because when you talk to the fans and ask them, a lot of times what they'll say is, I really like what she made out of her life coming up from poverty, or I really like that she was born poor and look where she is now. That's very inspiring to people.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's part of her iconography. I know it's part of her quote unquote image. It's also true. I mean, she's a multi-fucking millionaire. It's like, and she grew up with nothing. Mm-hmm. And I don't care how hackneyed it sounds. It's true. And I think that's inspiring to people. And I think that's why one of the things I think needs to be looked into is fan response. I mean, her demographic is vast.
Mhm.
It's everything from gays to Nazis. I mean, it's everybody. It's children, it's old people, it's Black, it's white, it's rural, it's urban, it's everyone. When I first told my goddaughter I was going to be doing a book with Dolly, she said, she lives in Brooklyn, and she's going like, oh, everybody loves Dolly. That'll be great. I mean, that was her one statement on Dolly. Everybody loves Dolly. And it's true. And her demographic is breathtaking. It's absolutely breathtaking that she is able to appeal to so wide and so diverse a group of people. I'm in awe. I'm
Yeah.
totally in awe.
Hey, so let's turn this over to the audience. And, you know, we only have about 30 minutes, folks. So I would love to have your questions, but if we could keep them short, sweet, to the point so we could answer as many as possible, that would be great. So if you would unmute yourself or throw a question into the chat, both Greg and I will be happy to make sure your question gets asked.
There was a question posed in the chat a while back about our panelists' thoughts on Dolly's podcast. Just a general question about what you thought
Yeah,
about Dolly Parton's America.
Yeah, that's Laura Dubeck. That's MTSU. Okay. Hey, panelists, what do you think of Dolly Parton's America?
Well, I'm in it, so I'm in that. I have to recuse myself, I think. The people that did it were not Dolly experts. They were just fascinated with her and wanted to learn, and they did a brilliant job at it. You know, sometimes their questions were extremely tedious, and it's like, come on, people, don't you know anything? It's like I got impatient at some points, but you know what? They did a great job.
Leigh and Lydia?
I would say one thing that's been really interesting about that podcast is that it got so much attention that I think it prompted people to be interested in studying her more deeply. So I know that there are people that I always teach her in my classes as a case study. And, you know, there's a lot of great articles and books to read about her. But I think that podcast made more people aware of that there are deeper conversations going on about her and they could go read them or be interested in them. And I had some people contact me who have started teaching her in class. And it's prompted them to, you know, go look up more material about her or try to learn more, or sort of a topic of maybe a deeper intellectual discussion publicly in the public sphere. So I think that's been really interesting as a response to that.
Cool. Lydia?
Oh, well, what Leigh said, that was basically going to be my response, was that it just opened up, I think, many people's ideas and minds about Dolly, people who knew about her, but it was such an accessible way to get information about her. And it was really terrific. And I was struck by how personal they got in some of the questions and how willing she was to go there and answer some of those very deeply personal questions. So I was pretty amazed at that.
Sometimes celebrities appreciate that. I mean, I remember I was interviewing Loretta one time and she just said, ask me something hard. You can ask me anything. You know, they want, in some ways, when you've been interviewed so much, it's actually, they actually welcome a curveball. Excuse me.
Right. So if I remember, if I saw this correctly, Jad Abumrad's dad is a friend of Dolly's because she was in a car accident a while back and he took care of her and they became friends. Now, when Dolly got her shot, her COVID vaccine shot, was it his dad who gave it to her at Vanderbilt? Because remember, she gave $1 million to Vanderbilt to develop one of the vaccines. And then she went and got the vaccine and started singing vaccine, vaccine, vaccine to the Jolene. Thanks. But I think it was the podcast director's dad who gave her the shot.
It was.
Yes, it was.
I wanted to say one other thing too. I think at one point they asked her a question about, I think they were asking her what she thought of Nadine Hubbs's work on her. So they asked her a little bit about, there is this kind of flowering of scholarship about her right now. And I think they asked her what she thought of it. And so that was really interesting because I think, she's super smart and people are curious as to whether or not she's interested in what the scholarship is saying or not,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
She pays attention. She always does.
Yeah, but she's also quick-witted. I remember one of the things she brought up was going with Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin to, was it the Grammys or Oscars, one of them, and they said something that she considered pretty political, and right away she's able to snap back, not snap as in a bad way, but say, my image relies on apolitical or non-political statements. And so part of her brilliance is that quick wit, that ability to respond. And Bob, you brought it up too. She caught all the spelling and grammar errors and all the informational errors.
I think it's too, it's a part of country music culture that you are humble and that you want people to like you so much. There's no such thing as a rock and roll attitude in country music. It's not allowed. You must be liked. And that's a very big part of who you are as a country music artist. And I think that's why it's very difficult for many of them to speak about controversial topics. It's sort of bred into them that you don't do that.
One thing that I heard in an interview, and I don't remember who was doing the interview, and I don't remember if it was right or left politically, but the interviewer was pressing Dolly to say something about Donald Trump. And I don't know whether he wanted her to say something negative or positive, but he was pressing her to say something. And she did her usual joke that she'll do, oh, well, I don't really think about that. Or, there's boobs in the White House. She made one of her kind of standard jokes, and the person didn't take the hint and so pressed again. No, but really, Dolly, what do you think? And so she made yet another joke, and this person still wasn't getting it. And finally, the person really pressed her and said, but look, Dolly, you're a role model. You're really a role model. So, shouldn't you speak up because you're a role model? And Dolly didn't miss a beat. She just said, I know I'm a role model, and that's why I don't talk about other people. And she just shut that right down. And, I thought that was really a brilliant way to sidestep. And how it was also brilliant that coming away from that interview, I still couldn't tell which direction she was being pulled or pushed. She just wasn't going to go there.
Yeah. And everyone of every political persuasion is also convinced that she agrees with them.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a real good. We have a question in the chat box from Ben Atkinson. Do the panelists have any views on Dolly's international reputation? A lot of international fans have clearly come into country music through her music. And yes, I agree, Ben, that it might be an area of study as well. But how come everybody internationally likes Dolly?
Leigh, do you remember that when we were on that radio show, there was some fan that called in that said something like, she's got to go to she grew up in a wee cabin, didn't she? Or something like that. Or, there was some kind of allusion to her poverty. And I think that's poverty is universal.
Yeah.
And so are Spangles.
It's true. Yeah, Bob was talking about, we were recently on a BBC radio interview from Belfast. And there were folks that were calling in that were really interested in engaging with Dolly Parton, and super knowledgeable about her and very invested in her. And I think that you can see that in a lot of different areas around the world. And you also see kind of, I think in part because of her life story, what Bob is talking about, but oftentimes it might be sort of outsider voices that are identifying with her. So there are a lot of indigenous groups where there are folks that are deeply invested in her music, and just different parts of the world, I think maybe connecting to the content and the life story, and also just the global circulation of her work and for so many decades and so prolific.
Yeah, and there's something called charisma. I mean, she has it.
Right.
There was a crew they were doing something with the BBC called Country Week at the BBC or something like that. It was a TV special. And Dolly was kind of the host in between. So I had scripted all these little lines for her to say in between introducing acts and stuff like this. And we spent all day on it, and the crew was all British. And at the end of the day, they had never worked with her before. At the end of the day, she looked at them, she said, "Would y'all like to have your picture made with me?" And they all went, "Yes." They did. I mean, they were completely smitten. They were just news people from the BBC, and by the end of the day, they were complete puddles. I mean, they were just like, "Oh my God, I love her so much."
One thing that I would say about particularly her popularity in the UK and Ireland, and to some extent Australia, though not as much. Not that she's not as popular, but this connection I want to make is that she's really in the past decades told the story of her life through that Appalachian story of, my people are the Scots-Irish people, the English people, the ballads in the mountains. She's tapping into that that sort of historiography and idea. In fact, she said it goes nicely with the story of my life. So when she introduces an album like Heart Songs in 1994 and says, "My songs sound old because they sound like the songs from England and Ireland and Scotland and Wales," she always mentions Wales as well. She's making that link that then folks in those areas can say, "Oh, she's one of us. She's connecting back to us." And so then the Irish press writes an article about Dolly's Smoky Mountain DNA is Irish, and one of the questions I asked her about was that connection she felt to Ireland. And it's funny, Bob, the idea about the wee little cabin, what she said was that she felt that the music of the mountains, the Appalachian Mountains, was similar to Irish music because of the hardships, because of the hard lives, and that it comes from a similar kind of place. So I think that people in other parts of the world can feel connected to her because she's actually constructing her own history through them.
And you don't know where it's. Greg this morning sent me an article, a review of the book in Japanese. That Greg knew this guy who'd written something in I don't know what the review says, but but who knew that they were getting her in Japan.
So we have a question in the chat box. Does or would Dolly see herself as a leader? And this is from Heather Heath. And Heather, I would listen to the Brene Brown podcast because Brene Brown does a lot of leadership studies. And Heather writes a little bit more in the chat, but what do you think, how would our panelists answer that? Leadership and Dolly.
Well, Leigh, I think this is up your alley because this is a great dualism question. This is like her profound sense of humility and her profound knowledge about who she is. I mean, again, she's doing both things at once. She's being humble and being an inspiration. She knows both of those things well. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to answer that. I mean, any other way to say except to say that it's another one. When Leigh talks in her book about all these dualities, I think this is another one.
Yeah, and I'd say too that she's very ethically grounded in what she chooses to put her energy into. So just the literacy example with the Imagination Library, sort of long-running work that she's done based on her father having been illiterate and sort of life experience where she's deeply invested in it and deeply caring about it. But I'll say that program has been so successful that people in education departments study it as a model of literacy training because it really works well. And so I'd say just really ethically grounded things that she gets involved in that she then is exhibiting leadership over. There's a reason why she's choosing those. That is, again, there's an ethical anchor there. And she is doing really high quality work with it.
And I think she's so grounded in her region. I mean, the library obviously has now gone international, and that's terrific. But so much of what she does, pouring back into her own, Sevierville and Sevier County, like the wildfires telethon that she threw together, that the country music big cable stations wouldn't take on because she wanted to go on the air as fast as possible, and they couldn't do the production values fast enough that they wanted. So she was on channels like RFD and, some of these others, but still raising so much money. She didn't care whether she got good production values. She was ready to go on the air and just get to work. And I was also surprised to learn through my research that she's donated money to local medical facilities, and that there is a Dolly Parton birthing unit in Sevier County, and women's mammography, so that these aren't things that she's out there talking about on all the talk shows, right? But these are really helping people right where they live in areas that may not be as glamorous a philanthropy as some other kinds of things. But it's rooted in, I think, again, her sense of home and place.
I think that the one area of capital L leadership that she would be comfortable with would be children. She knows the children do need leaders, and she knows the children do need figures to guide them. And you should see children around her. It's unbelievable. They think she looks like a fairy godmother come down to earth, and they're just completely awestruck by her presence. I mean, she's an overwhelming physical presence anyway. I've seen fans just break down and cry by just posing for a picture with her or stuff. I mean, but these children that she ministers to with the Imagination Library, I think that if you wanted to pin her down and say, where are you a leader? I think that is the one area where she would say she would be comfortable saying, I want to lead children. Mm-hmm. I think in her adult world, I think she would be too humble to claim leadership, because she knows many gifted people, and she knows many talented people and many national and international figures. She's met everybody. But I think that the children would be the one area where she might say, yes, I'm a leader.
But I would also argue one of the new things that we're seeing with Mackenzie Scott, Jeff Bezos' former wife, who walked out of her marriage with $57 billion, are new models of philanthropy. So Mackenzie Scott gave money to Grand Valley State and to Morgan State, historically Black universities and colleges, and gave them tremendous. Grand Valley got $40 million to set up a Toni Morrison School of Writing. And Dolly's doing the same thing, that women as philanthropists don't go for, they compare Mackenzie Scott with Michael Bloomberg, who gave a bucket load of money to Johns Hopkins, his alma mater, so he could have his name on a building. So he could say, see, look, I'm rich, I could give money. And that people like Dolly and like Mackenzie go out and say, I don't want to showcase myself. I want to invest in things that I find important and that I know would have helped me. I mean, a birthing unit, her mother had 12 children. Of course, she's going to invest in something like that. And so, and $1 million to Vanderbilt to find a vaccine with her, using her friends and her networks. Those are things that have meaningful impact in the moment to a wide array of people. A whole bunch of money to Johns Hopkins, I would argue, probably doesn't. Mm-hmm. So some of that is the approach to philanthropy as well. From our audience, are there any other questions? We still have a couple minutes left with our great authors here who have led us down some really interesting paths today. Greg, I think you had Greg, I think you had a question that you had in your back pocket there.
Yeah, I do have a question. Thanks, Kris and everyone. I'd like to ask what the authors think about genre as it relates to Dolly's career and output. Obviously, people think of her as a country artist, and for good reason, but she's done and been a lot more than that in her music over the course of her career, veering into pop and into disco, and she's done bluegrass, and she's, you know, moved back and forth. She's collaborated with artists who are known in other genres. She's had her own songs covered by artists who are noteworthy in other genres. So I know Lydia obviously has thought about this a lot in relationship to Dolly's songwriting, and I'd love to hear her comments on that, but also to Leigh and to Bob, just in terms of the persona, the perception of Dolly, and how she herself might think of these categories. You know, does she think of them at all?
Well, I think that she would still probably bottom line say that she is a country artist, but a country artist who took country to other places. You know, during the 70s, when she was going with LA management and going all out pop, and Nashville was mad and felt that she'd betrayed them, you know, she was saying, look, I'm not leaving country, I'm just taking country with me. And she viewed that move as saying, I'm actually doing a lot for country music by doing this, because she was going into pop music, but what that was also doing was bringing more people in to listen to her music, and then, you know, sort of sidestepping over and then exploring, well, what else is she doing? Oh, well, there's all of this country music. I think it's interesting too, when I got into the march through all of the albums that I did, and I got into the late 70s and 80s, when most of the albums were pop music albums, and more of them were songs only by other writers. Once you get into the pop albums in the 80s, you have to search to find Dolly Parton written songs on those albums, which I think is interesting. She's not writing in that style. But even in an album that was completely panned by Rolling Stone as being, you know, schmaltzy and a sellout to pop music, she still put songs on there like Me and Little Andy. If any of you know Me and Little Andy, the real weeper song there, or God's Coloring Book, a song about sitting around in nature and looking at all the colors and how it's God's coloring book. Like in the middle of songs, middle of albums where she's singing Baby I'm Burnin' in a disco style, she's still putting those songs, even against probably what her management wants her to do. She's still putting those songs on her album. So I think she's always grounded there. And then I guess I'll just end by saying, she said when she was moving into pop music, she knew she was a star. She wanted to be a star, but she said, I want to be a superstar. And you can't be a superstar if you're only in one area. So you will never be a superstar if you're only country. So just some thoughts for you there.
Leigh or Bob?
I agree with that. I think that's pretty much sums it up. I would add an editorial comment about Rolling Stone panning an album when they'd never paid a slightest bit of attention to country music before. All of a sudden, you know, they care about country music. Give me a break.
Exactly.
Yeah. Leigh?
I was just going to say that I think her work kind of shows such a facility with different genres, that she's such a talented musician, that she can cross genre boundaries really easily. And again, sort of within pop music studies, we would sort of think about genre fluidity, that sometimes some of these distinctions are arbitrary and they might change over time and get more fluid. And you can certainly see in different time periods, people think about what that genre is and means differently. And so I would kind of see her as a boundary breaker in that sense as well, in terms of genres. And also there's, you know, been a lot of work done about gender and genres as well. And so I think she's important for that too.
Mm-hmm.
It's also important to point out that during her lifetime, Patsy Cline was considered too pop. And now we consider Patsy Cline to be the definitive country music singer. It's like,
I'm changed.
yeah, definitions change.
Mhm.
Any final questions or comments from the audience?
I had a question.
Eric, just a second, please. Kelsey, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did have a question. Just a quick one, and for whomever is interested in answering. And I think we touched on this a little bit about talking about like this is like a Dolly Parton moment. And like as a Tennessean myself, I don't really quite know who in this panel is from Tennessee or not. But as a Tennessean, she's like a ubiquitous aspect of culture here. She has some amount of sanctitude, in all honesty, because I've never questioned her influence on where I'm from. Like that's just, it's a part of it. So I kind of wonder, what would you say is the exigency of studying her now? I know, Leigh, you mentioned she has all these different implications for gender and race and women in the workforce, all of these different things. And so like, why now? Why Dolly Parton? Why so much investigation into one person, one amazing person, but one person? I'm just curious.
So I think that she is a case study, kind of speaks to a lot of these issues that are sort of powerfully important right now. They've always been important, but they're being talked about maybe much more publicly. So around, gender, race, and class, and LGBTQ plus rights, and she's been a leader in that. And so, I think that she is sort of speaking to our larger cultural moment in important ways.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need Dolly. I think the culture needs her. We're in a very weird place in this culture right now on so many levels, and she's a healer. And I think that we need Dolly. And I know that she's having a huge moment. I'm a record collector and I'm in record shops all the time. And everybody who works in retail in music right now tells me they can't keep Dolly product in the stores. Anything. Doesn't matter what era, doesn't matter what genre she's singing in. If it's got her name and her picture on it, it's out the door.
Yep.
She is selling like never before right now. And she's in the public mind like never before right now. And that's because the culture needs her right now.
Yep.
Right. I know that when I started working on the book in 2011, it was not at all a Dolly moment. I the book came out right at this moment, which I guess is a nice timing. But when I've been asked by various folks in the media or journalism, why is Dolly so popular? What is it? I always say that I think right now, and this isn't news to anyone, all the news is bad news all the time. It's only, is it worse than it was yesterday? The news is so depressing and so bad, and people feel so fractured, and I think we're being told to stay fractured. It becomes a kind of circular argument that we're all in our camps and we're all separate. And then I think people are astonished that one person can be universally liked and admired, and it just feels like such an unusual capability to be able to speak to everyone without rancor. And then the other thing is, as Bob said, we need her. I think with all of the bad news and gloom and doom that we all see every day, to have somebody who seems to bridge those gaps and who is so optimistic and loving and generous, I think is just, it does feel somewhat healing to have that.
She's a light.
Yeah. Hey, folks, we're getting close to the end, and I have 2 questions left. And Eric, what was your question?
I was gonna ask what y'all if you could provide some insight on why Dolly created Dollywood.
Well, the park was already there. It was Silver Dollar City was there. It was built by the Hirshhorn family from Branson, Missouri. They had theme park there and one in East Tennessee. So the park was already there. The train, actually, when you take the train ride, that train has been there since the 20s, I think, or something. It's an old attraction that they built Dollywood around, an existing attraction.
I think also it might not be an accident. I think it was a good financial move for her, so she would have probably done it no matter when. But in the mid 80s, 1986, it was another way, one of these contradictions. Here's this country girl who's gone all glam out to LA, and she seems to have tipped all the way that direction. And then, oh, look what she's done. She's come back home and opened up a theme park with a grist mill and a railroad station and all of that. It was a way to also kind of maybe not reclaim, but restake that identity of the kind of mountain identity that she also wanted to have, as she was having this other identity of the LA pop star.
Yeah.
And it's the largest employer in the county.
Yeah.
Right.
But they've always done country music resorts, so the model was already there. I hate to move people on, folks. I hate doing this, but Paula Bishop, and we'll ask our last question. We need to be, as a predominantly white group of people, we need to start including conversations about race. And Dolly certainly has mentioned things, but Dolly comes from a place, as I said earlier, that was constructed in the late 19th century as a place of pure whiteness. That it was that sort, and now we're in a moment where we need to discuss race. We need to discuss the ways that culture constructs who is Black, who is white, and the power associated with each of those constructions. And so if I could have our panelists say one final word about how we can use Dolly to think and talk and write about race in America, that would be great.
Well,
okay, Bob, go.
first of all, East Tennessee was Union during the Civil War and harbored runaway slaves. There are Black mountain communities to this day in Appalachia. There are Black hillbillies. So the culture may perceive that as white, but it's not. And those Black hillbillies make country music too. So I would just backtrack a little bit by saying I don't think that region is as white as people commonly assume it to be.
Okay.
I think because of her humanity and her collaborations with everybody from Queen Latifah to Mavis Staples to Smokey Robinson she is a willing collaborator with African-American musicians and deeply admires them. And I think that's a model we should all take to heart, that you admire somebody for their gift rather than the color of their skin or their brain,
Okay. Leigh?
Well, I was going to say that I think some of the work that has been done about her and race has to do with how is she constructing some of these tropes of Southern white working class femininity, sort of if you're looking at how race, class, and gender are impacting each other in her identity construction. I think that's important as a case study to analyze. And then I think too that some of the recent scholarship that's being done about her, Tressie McMillan Cottom's been working on this as well. This idea of, in terms of the reception and framing of her, in terms of race, is it sort of picking up on some larger tropes about race and sort of needing to address structural racism more fully, maybe in some of the reception of her or cultural framing of her. That's sort of some of the points that she's been making.
Okay. Lydia?
Well, I agree with what the other panelists have said, and I guess I would just say that I think from my perspective, to really work on these issues around Dolly, we have to also work on the larger framework that Bob was mentioning of country music, and in particular old time hillbilly bluegrass music not being monolithically white. But I think the more that we understand those musics through the lens of race, the more then we will understand Dolly's place within those musics. Because on the surface, she doesn't talk in those terms, she doesn't present in those terms, but that's the context. And she's still, as I mentioned earlier, telling the story of her experience through that white lens of this is all Scots-Irish connected music. And yes, there's that thread in there, but not really talking about the other musics that are there. And so I think we need to really address those larger issues, sort of where Greg's other Zoom sessions were, last week and on old time music and race and gender. I think unpacking that material on a larger frame will help us understand Dolly in that context.
And with that, folks, thank you all for joining us. And thank you to Lydia, Leigh, and Bob for a wonderful hour and a half. And I would invite you folks to check out the Center for Popular Music's website so that you can see the upcoming events at the center. And again, a round of applause for our 3 panelists. Yay!
And also for our moderator, Kris McCusker. Thank you, Kris. Thanks to all the panelists, and thanks especially to all of you in the audience for being here. We could talk about Dolly all day long, I'm sure, but our time is up and past up, in fact. So thank you very much for sticking around, for being here, and thanks to everyone for their participation. See you around.
Bye, y'all. Take care.